Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're excited to have you all here and to be able to join you on Facebook.
My name is Amanda Daniel. I'm a child and family clinician at Integra, which is one of the many programs here at the Child Development Institute. And I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Torie.
Hello, I'm also a child and family clinician at the Integra program at CDI.
You may also see a name on the screen, Baden, who's our tech support tonight. So she'll be helping us moderate your comments and questions as we go. So we are from Integra, where we support young people ages 8 to 18 who have learning disabilities and co-occurring mental health challenges. So in our program, we offer therapy and therapeutic interventions through an LDMH lens. So that's learning disabilities and mental health. And we'll talk later about how those two things interrelate. So Torie and I make up the Community Education and Engagement Team, or the CEE team, as we'll refer to it. And we offer workshops and trainings to caregivers, teachers, other mental health professionals, anyone who's wanting to better understand learning disabilities and the social and emotional impact that they can have on young people and how to better support those young people. So we're very excited to be speaking with you all tonight. And at the beginning of any workshop, we feel it's important to start with a land acknowledgement and express our gratitude for getting to do the work that we do on this land. At the Child Development Institute, we acknowledge that the land on which we work is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and our community is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and we recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. So we're hoping that tonight can be as interactive and helpful as possible. So please pose questions that you have throughout so that we can make sure what we're sharing is relevant for you. We do want to remind our audience tonight that this is live and a public discussion. So for all of our online safety, if you're commenting, which we hope that you do, please avoid sharing personal information about others, particularly kids. And we also want to state that tonight's talk is intended to be educational and we'll be providing general information and strategies for how to support families with that transition back to school. But that said, please consult with professionals that know your child specifically to get tailored recommendations for your family and your kid. So for those who are maybe just logging on, again, I'm Amanda, this is Torie, we're from Integra, and we're going to be talking about supporting kids with learning disabilities as they return to school or continue with their online education.
Thanks for that great introduction, Amanda. And if anyone has specific questions that they're really hoping get answered today and are really hoping that we touch on, please type them in, share them with us so that we can make sure that we're covering that and that this is as relevant as possible to you. So we also want to acknowledge that this is a really unique back to school season. It's completely, fairly different from all others. And we aren't experts in what back to school in COVID looks like because it's such a new situation. Really, nobody is. We're all trying to figure it out as we go. That being said, we know that children's hospitals have been recommending schools reopen because we know that routine and social interaction is so important for young people's mental health and well-being. And at the same time, returning in person might not be the right choice for every child and family. So each family will be making that decision based on what you know is best for your specific child and family situation. So with all this unknown, we do still know a lot about transitions in general and how to make them more successful for kids, especially those with learning disabilities and/or mental health issues. So we'll be drawing on that knowledge and the research around how to make transitions successful this evening. in talking about how to ease the transition back to school for kids this year. And obviously, we'll kind of be peppering in some specifics about the current situation and how it might impact things as we go. So I'll pass it over to Amanda.
Yeah, so I want to start by giving an overview of what learning disabilities, or what we'll refer to as LDs, are and how they impact our young people. And if you have questions on this specific topic, again, please type them in. I'm going to talk for about 5 minutes about LDs specifically, and then answer any questions or address any comments that come up. So learning disabilities are difficulties in information processing, meaning that they can affect one or multiple of the following: how we take in information, right? So the information we see or hear, how we understand information, how we organize it or manipulate it while we're holding it in our mind, how we store and retrieve information, like our memory, and how we express information, right? So verbally, written, etc. It's important to note that people who have learning disabilities are smart, meaning that you have to have average to above average intelligence in order to meet the criteria for that diagnosis. So we know that kids that have LDs are just as smart, if not smarter, than their same age peers, but they're having difficulty in some area of processing that's making it tough to learn, tough to show what they know. We also want to highlight that learning disabilities are very common. About 5 to 10% of Canadians have a diagnosis of an LD. They're also lifelong, so they're genetic, they're with us throughout the life course, although they might present differently in childhood than they do, say, in adulthood, when the demands of our environment are different, or as we develop new skills or abilities to cope. We also want to highlight that learning disabilities affect every aspect of a young person. We often talk about them in the context of academics, but here at Integra, we really focus on the social and emotional impact of learning disabilities. So on that note, it's important for us to know that 75% of kids who have LDs also experience difficulty in their social relationships, or what we refer to as their ability to make and keep friends. And this relationship between LDs and social relationships might be new to people. So, for example, if a child has an LD in visual spatial processing, so their ability to process visual information, this might make it challenging to decode things like maps or graphs or images. And in the social realm, this LD can make it really challenging to decode someone's facial expressions or their body language or their tone of voice to detect things like sarcasm. So that social impact is clear. We also know that learning disabilities can impact mood, anxiety level, self-esteem, right? All of those pieces of our mental wellness. For a lot of kids, school is an environment where they've had to work incredibly hard to keep up, and their hard work often isn't reflected in the outcome. Right? It may often be that they're met with feedback from adults at school that they need to try harder or pay more attention, right? Put more effort in, even though that's not reflective of the level of investment that they're giving. So school can be a chronically invalidating environment for some of our kids. Where it's tough to show what they know. And they may receive negative messages in their school environment about their capability. So we want to put up an image here that we're going to refer back to throughout tonight's talk. And it's the image of a teeter-totter or a seesaw. And the idea here is that for all of our mental health, it's a balancing act between the demands of our environment, right, or what we're being asked to do, the information we have to process, and our ability to cope, right? So we've got stressors or demands, and then our ability to cope with those demands. And we know that kids with LDs have heightened demands, right? Socially, academically, emotionally, and it's more difficult to process this information. And these demands may sometimes outweigh their ability to cope. So, Torie, if you're watching the chat for me, are there any questions or comments at this point?
So we don't have anything right now. So if anyone does have questions specifically about the information Amanda was talking about learning disabilities, please feel free to type them in. while we're kind of waiting for that, we're going to just jump into a little bit about the current situation with COVID-19 and the back to school transition and how that might be impacting young people, and specifically young people with LDs. So as Amanda mentioned, learning disabilities can impact kids by making it sometimes harder to process information. And that can come out at times with difficulties in transition. So for some, not all kids, but some kids with learning disabilities or mental health challenges or things like ADHD, transitions are particularly hard. And so in this current context, adding the fact that kids have been out of school for so long makes it even harder to get back into routines and sort of shift back into a school routine. As well, they're getting used to something that is new because how school's going to look this year is different from how it has looked in the past. So again, it's a bigger transition than they may be used to, and that can make it harder for many kids, and then in particular, kids who struggle with transitions during regular times. So I'm going to share another image here. Just to kind of start off talking about this idea of what things are like right now. So I like this one because it really shows that each of us is unique and comes with our own unique experiences. And so how we experience a specific situation, like this, for example, the stresses of COVID right now, and how that has impacted us is going to be different depending on so many different factors. And so we're going to talk in some general terms, but also acknowledging that what applies to one kid or one family might be different for another kid or another family. So right now, some families may be really impacted by the current situation. Perhaps they're struggling with stressors like unemployment or being personally affected by COVID-19. So everyone's going to be coming at this school year from a different place. For some kids, they might be really excited to get back to school. They want to see their friends. That's a huge draw for them. For other kids, they might have really enjoyed not being at school. Like Amanda mentioned, for many kids who have learning disabilities, school can be a very difficult place for them. So for some of them, they may have really enjoyed not being pushed up against some of those challenges on a daily basis. And so going back to school may be especially stressful for them. So in a normal year, back to school can be both exciting and stressful. And kids in any given year are wondering, if they're going to a new school, am I going to be able to find my class? How do I get around? What's my routine going to look like? What's the schedule like? How long are classes? What classes do I have and when? Who's my teacher? So those are really normal, typical school worries. They might also be wondering things like, am I going to have friends? Are my friends going to be in my class? They might have fears around bullying and if other people might make fun of them this year. They may also have questions around, who are my support people going to be? Is my teacher going to understand how I learn, or are they going to be friendly? Are the staff that I'm used to going to, are they still going to be there? And am I going to have access to them? And this year, that one is especially highlighted because there's some uncertainty around that right now. And kids might also be wondering about the workload, because as they move up in grades, the workload can get heavier. And so with every new year that comes, often they're wondering about that. This year, there are some extra considerations and possible stressors. And again, these can be different for each kid and family, and they might be different depending on whether a child's returning to school in person or continuing e-learning at home. But they may have questions and worries about, will I be able to do my regular activities in sports or clubs or the things that I enjoy outside of school or at school? Am I going to be able to see my friends as often? Because there's still those physical distancing limits. Am I going to be able to play the games that I like at recess? There might be more frustrations around homework, especially if they're doing more e-learning. Or for high school students, when they're not in the classroom, they might be wondering, am I going to have as much teacher support? Or if they really benefit from having that teacher support when they're doing assignments in class, they might be worried about not having that. So they can have this whole range of emotions that are going on. And what we really want to acknowledge is that all of those are okay. We don't necessarily want them to feel some of these hard feelings, but all of those are natural reactions to the uncertainty and the stresses that are going on right now. And some kids are really excited about being back in a school routine as well and seeing friends. So that's also a really important thing to acknowledge, that, especially as adults, sometimes we're thinking about all the what ifs, and our kids might actually be really excited about this back to school situation. So just kind of acknowledging that all of those feelings can be going on for both kids and parents. So it's really important to just be patient with ourselves and kind of accept all those feelings that might come up. A big thing this year is uncertainty, and that can bring up a lot of anxiety for both kids and parents. So we'll be talking a bit more about what we can do to manage and tolerate some of that uncertainty, because there are some questions that may not be answered right at the start of school, and it might take a while until all those questions get answered. And we also want to acknowledge the incredible amount of effort that parents are making right now, and all the things that are on your plates, because there is a lot. Many parents are balancing their own work with maybe the new school schedules, or supporting their kid with e-learning. Parents are wondering about, what if my kid is home more? Because if you get a cold, you might have to stay out of school, right? There are all these things that we're thinking about. Some families are trying to juggle unemployment and stresses around money right now, and all those other stressors that have come. So there are a lot of those things on parents' plates, and we really want to acknowledge that. And we'll be talking a little bit about the importance of recognizing that in yourself, and sort of that piece around taking care of ourselves as parents, so that we can be there effectively for our kids. So a couple other considerations, and then we'll kind of pause and take some more questions. So a couple specifics to think about is for kids who are more active or impulsive, that physical distancing might be especially hard for them this year. They might have a hard time not touching other people, or reaching out to do something that they normally would do, or staying appropriately spaced. And they might need a lot more reminders and a lot more practice to get used to that. And especially when they're excited and they're seeing their peers around, or they're in the middle of a game or something. And for kids with sensory sensitivities, which at Integra we see that a lot as well, they may have challenges around the feel of a mask and being able to wear that. So how it feels on their face, even the elastics around the back of their head, perhaps even the smell and feel of their own breath can be really distracting, or even just overwhelming for them. And so there might be, there are some pieces there that we'll talk about in terms of building up around that, and kind of problem solving some of those pieces as well. So yeah, there's a lot to be considering with this return to school, but luckily we can draw on many of the same strategies that have worked in the past. And we encourage you to think about, for your kids, what has worked for them in the past, and to draw on that knowledge that you have about what's helped them with transitions previously, because many of those same things will apply for this transition, even though this one seems bigger. So I'm just gonna check in with Amanda if there are any questions or
yeah, there's some great comments here in the chat. We have a teacher in the audience tonight who's sharing that she's working at a virtual school and is really concerned about the kids in her class that have LDs and how they're going to learn on this platform, which is absolutely valid. We know with LDs, a multimodal delivery of information is most effective, and it's really tough to attain that. And I love to see that there's teachers that are already thinking, okay, how can I still meet those needs? We are going to put some resources that I think can help support both parents and teachers in exploring how they can leverage kids' learning strengths to meet those needs. So yeah, we'll circle back to that, but very fair concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish we could sort of share, oh, here are all these resources for, different apps or things that would help. We don't necessarily have that, but we will share what we know from sort of the social emotional perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a couple caregivers are commenting, why don't schools adapt to meet these learning needs in the spirit of inclusion and diversity? And another parent commenting, ADHD is also so common. It's tough to think that a school environment isn't matching what those kids' needs are. Yeah, which is absolutely true. I know there are educators in schools going above and beyond to be flexible and to meet those needs. And sometimes parents have to be real advocates. And again, when we get into strategies, we'll talk a little bit about what's helpful and kind of what to ask for. But yeah, super valid.
Yeah, and absolutely true. And I don't know, our presentation is a little more geared towards caregivers, but certainly for the um, educators who are joining us, considering things like the universal designs for learning, where the how you're delivering um, the material is already multimodal, so it kind of automatically catches different learners who have different strengths can be really some really helpful resources, and there are a number of resources out there on universal design for learning, so that can be a helpful one as well.
Great. Thanks everyone for your thoughts. So Torie was talking about some concerns specific to COVID, and we are going to talk about COVID specific strategies and support. But first, we want to lean on the knowledge that we already know about transitions, what we know to be helpful for kids, specifically kids with learning disabilities. So I'm going to talk about that for about 10 minutes or so. Again, please share your thoughts, share your questions, and let me know what you think about some of this stuff. So the first strategy that we know to be helpful is to get familiar with the child's learning profile. Right. So I'm going to ask Baden, our tech support tonight, if you can share the LDMH handbook in the comments there. That's a resource that takes a lot of psychology language and makes it really accessible, and talks about different specific LDs, what that looks like, and what support can be helpful. So please do leverage that as a resource. But yeah, getting familiar with your child's strengths. Whenever we start new routines or re-enter an academic space, there's so much information to process. So we want to lean on those strengths as much as possible. For example, if your child's verbal reasoning or child you work with, verbal reasoning is really strong, we want to take visuals and put them into words. So that might look like verbally explaining a behavior chart that they have in their classroom, or putting implicit expectations into words. Or if that child has a strength in visual processing, right? So processing visual information, it may be taking their routine and creating a mind map with it, where instead of having to work incredibly hard to decode sentences, they're able to see the flow of their daily routine. If a child has difficulty with executive functioning, so that's the area of the brain where we plan and organize, they might benefit from discussing challenging situations before they occur, so that they have a plan and know how to respond beforehand. So for example, if your child's so excited to play soccer the first day back from recess, talking to them about, okay, so if recess comes and your classmates don't want to play soccer, what's plan B? What are you going to do? This will, of course, look different for every kid, but please use the handbook as a resource, and of course, consult with professionals that know your child well. Another piece that we know is helpful for transitions is bolstering consistency. Huge for kids. A lot of the families I know I'm working with have staggered entry back to school, or some are staying online. So strive to make daily routines as consistent as possible, right? Consistent sleep routines, bedtime, wake up time, consistent morning routines, right? What they're doing when they first get up, consistent meal times where possible. All those pieces are helpful so that it doesn't feel like multiple transition periods each week. Coming back to that seesaw image, if we can throw that up again, another helpful strategy to ease transitions is to acknowledge the seesaw, right? Acknowledge that the demands of their environment just increased significantly. They have more information to process, more social demands. We want to acknowledge this internally so that we can have more patience in this transition, and also maybe evaluate the demands that we're placing on the child and, consider, is there any demands we could take off right now since they're dealing with so much? It can also be helpful to acknowledge this with the child and validate that this transition is not easy. So for example, if they come home after their first day exhausted, validating it, right? It makes sense that you're exhausted because it's a long day and because you had such a long break. No wonder you're exhausted. Jumping back into a routine that's so different and building friendships at school is really tough. Of course you're exhausted. When we see kids struggling or having tough emotions, we're often tempted to give what we often refer to as drive-by validation, where we say some version of, yeah, today was tough, but tomorrow is going to get better, or, but it's going to feel normal soon. What we know about relationships and coping is that it's significantly more helpful to deeply validate what a kid's feeling and fight that urge to jump in with but and to reframe as a positive. So we have presentations that talk in depth about, those skills around validation because it's tough, something that I think all of us human beings struggle to do. So if you're interested in that, Baden later on is going to also post a flyer for the CEE workshops. So those are the workshops that Torie and myself run, and we dive pretty deeply into that skill of validation there. Another thing to keep in mind, we're going to put up another visual here of an iceberg. So this is another analogy that we often use when working with families or educators. And what we know about icebergs is that we see 10% of its mass above water, right? While the other 90% is beneath. And this also holds true for a child or youth's mental health. What we see on the surface with kids is their behavior. Maybe they're internalizers, right, that withdraw, avoid, or shut down. Or maybe they're externalizers that yell or have outbursts, or maybe a combination of both. This behavior is the tip of the iceberg, and it's helpful to interpret that behavior as a clue that something else is going on under the surface in that moment. And what we're seeing is an attempt to cope. Interpreting that child's behavior with that iceberg in mind can hopefully help us be more patient and understanding. Again, this is tough and always a work in progress. So if this metaphor resonates with you, again, check out our CE workshops. It's a complex one for sure, but can help us interpret behavior more accurately. And lastly, for general strategies, give yourself permission to also focus on the positives of going back to school. As Torie was saying, we as adults often tend to think of the what ifs and get quite anxious ourselves. We know about school that structure, routine, social connection, those are all essential for mental wellness, right? We also know that a lot of caregivers have been taking on this really tough role of parent and educator. And the shift back to school for a lot of families is going to be healthy for that parent-child relationship. And hopefully with reentry to school, this also means re-engagement in other activities that the child enjoys or gets a sense of mastery or success from, right? Sports, cooking, art class, whatever it is for them. We know for our kids, especially with LDs, returning to school can bring up some big feelings of incompetence or inadequacy. And we want to meet the emotional need, which for incompetence, the emotional need is to feel competent. So creating opportunities for competence or to feel a sense of self-efficacy, right? Seek these opportunities out where you can, even if it's, allowing them to participate in something they're really great at or having a dinner table conversation on a topic that they're really knowledgeable at. Letting them teach you how to play a video game, some situation where you're kind of putting them in the knowledge holder seat so they can feel that sense of competence. That can be really meaningful. Torie, any comments, questions, thoughts from?
There is one question here in the chat just about a parent who's wondering about dropping their child off for school and how to sort of support them about going to a school for the first time when they might not be able to go there right now, or they might not be able to go into the school with their kid. And if I've misinterpreted that question, feel free to clarify. But it sounds like yeah, there are some things for sure that you can do at this moment to help them feel prepared. Um, so Amanda, feel free to pipe in, but some things that I'm thinking about would be,
Mhm.
um, going through some of the school materials, um, and looking through it with them. Um, oh, and it seems like maybe some anxiety about coverings like masks that are maybe making kids nervous. So for sure, um, masks are absolutely something that may be sort of off-putting, and you can't see people's facial expressions. For kids who already have struggled with that or who are anxious, that can be really hard because you're trying to figure out how do other people feel. Um, so that's one where lots of practice can be really helpful. So even, putting them for a chunk of time at home, or things like having them put the mask on while, or have your family put masks on while you're watching TV or doing something relaxing, um, can be like an easier way for them to get used to wearing them, because yeah, it's gonna, for a lot of kids it may take a while to get used to having the masks on all day.
Yep. I
For,
think they're commenting too here. It can be weird to drop your kid off to a teacher with a mask on and they're like, I don't know this person.
right.
And we
Yeah.
get, and I'm thinking of our kids with LDs too, right? We get so much information from someone's facial expression. And now we've cut off one of the greatest sources of, do they seem friendly? Are they going to like me? Is this going to go well? Yeah, I know one of the families I'm working with asked the teacher to send a photo so that they could know what that person's face looks like, and a smiling photo. Another family that I'm working with has started driving by the school because it's a new school for that child and they just want to see what it's like. They've gone for little walks on that property, right? Like any strategy to kind of ease into it. That's a,
Practicing the walk to school or spending time in the schoolyard there, for
yeah,
sure. Just anything that can get them into that space and starting to build a bit of comfort there.
absolutely.
These are great questions. Thank you, everyone. Keep them coming. We're happy
Yeah.
to, it's helpful when we have the feedback of what issues you're grappling with right now. So I'm going to jump into a little bit about, building on these strategies that Amanda spoke about. How do we build on those and address some of the current stressors? Um, so we just touched on a few, but one that I really want to highlight is this idea of taking care of yourselves, during this time, and as parents, taking some time for ourselves. So I really love this, that being a caregiver is easy, said no one ever. Um, Being a parent or a caregiver is one of the hardest jobs. It doesn't stop. There isn't, you don't sort of get a weekend away from your job, being a parent or a caregiver. So there's a lot, and especially right now, so much has been thrown at families in terms of balancing both this teacher role and parent role and your work roles or whatever else might be going on. Um, so really acknowledging that there may be a lot of stress for you as well. Um, and so one thing that you can actually do to really help your kid and their transition back to school is taking some time, and maybe that's during this presentation, maybe that's a few minutes after this presentation, or at a later date when you have a few moments, but doing a really honest check-in with yourself about where is your stress level at right now, what are your worries, what's on your mind, separate from your kid, and to really think about what's going on for you, and think about who do you have in your life as a support. Are there family members that you can reach out to for your own support? Are there, close friends that you have who are really helpful? Are there other parents you can talk to kind of have a reality check of, is this hard for you? Okay, this is hard for you too. Um,
Yeah.
right? Maybe it's a coworker, whoever it might be that you find helpful, or maybe it's a professional reaching out for your own mental health support. Can be a huge help in just kind of checking in with ourselves and making sure we're addressing our own anxiety and stress. Because when we kind of sort of take care of our own anxiety and stress and help ourselves, then we're much more effective at supporting our kids, and kind of being able to separate, is it my kid's worry or is it my worry? Because sometimes it's really hard in the moment to figure all of that out. So we really encourage you to take a bit of time, check in with yourself, um, and where your stress levels are at, because that's so important for you to be able to continue being the great parents that you are. So the other big thing we want to highlight this evening about this transition is that this is, again, there's so many more stressors. So just coping right now with this transition, whether it's back to in-person school for your child or to e-learning for your child this year, just getting through this time of uncertainty with your child feeling supported, that is the focus. Other goals, other, great aspirations, they can wait. If you can focus on that part, just coping with the uncertainty and helping your kid cope with the uncertainty and feel that you're there to support them, that's huge. And that is enough to focus on. Often September can be this time where families set big goals and we think about, okay, how is this school year going to be different from last year? And what are we going to do differently that's going to improve? But this year may not be the September for that. We really encourage you to just kind of focus on September as a time for settling in, both for your kid and for yourself, and waiting until at least the end of September to kind of start considering those bigger goals. So really giving more time to just allow yourselves and your kids to settle into what this new routine will look like for you. As Amanda was mentioning, it's also really helpful to talk with kids about their strengths and the things that they love and kind of have that balance. So the same thing is true for when we're supporting them. It's important to talk with them about what their worries are and their questions, and also to highlight the things that they're looking forward to. So they might be very anxious at school and also looking forward to seeing some of their friends. And being able to help them see both of those can really help to break down some of that anxious thinking where we're only focused on the stuff that could go badly. So really thinking about what are they also looking forward to and helping them talk about those things and celebrate those things as well can ease the transition and ease some of the anxiety, because it feels like there's a meaning for why they're going back. There's something that, is motivating for them about going back. To support kids in that, you can also talk about school as a place of connection and belonging. If there are people that they feel connected to and that they feel supported by at school. So if there are certain teachers that they've really appreciated in the past or that they have a good connection with, those can be things to talk about as well. And as we're thinking about getting into the school year, especially with this sort of different mode of learning that might be there, and sort of having kids might be a little more distanced, it might be harder for teachers to kind of get to know them because of all the extra protocols in place. Really developing a working relationship with your kids' teachers is really going to be huge this year, and keeping that communication open. Keep in mind that teachers are figuring this out too. There's some teachers joining us who are saying, yeah, how do we support kids with LDs? We want to do this well, but we have questions too. So keeping that in mind, that as much as families are trying to figure this out and know what it looks like, teachers are also trying to figure this out and know how to best support kids in this current context. So if you can develop that open relationship and talk with your kid's teacher about, this is what's worked in the past, or this is what hasn't worked in the past, that can be really helpful for them to know. As Amanda was mentioning, things like, my kid is really good with visual stuff. As much as you can, if you can put things in pictures, that'll help them a lot. Or if you show visuals, it doesn't make sense to them. So it's really helpful to talk those things through. If you can identify those things that work for your kid, or, my kid's really active, he's gonna need breaks. How can that happen in this context? Could they do jumping jacks on the spot, or some wall sits or something to get some energy out when they need it? What are some more contained ways of getting that energy out? And really talking collaboratively with the teacher of, this is what I know works, what's the current context, and how can we make it something work in this context? That's really definitely going to help, and it may ease your worries too if you kind of have that really working relationship with the teacher. And for kids as well, for them to know who their safe person is that they can go to. It's always important, This year, it might look a little bit different. So that might be a conversation to have with the school or the teacher that's working with your kid. And likely this year, it's probably going to be most effective if that go-to person is the kid's main teacher, because they, depending on how much kids are able to meet with other staff, it might be harder for them. So if there's a possibility to make that safe person their main teacher, that can really ease some worries about, will I be able to go see that person? What if they don't let me? What if I'm not allowed to walk around the school? So another really key thing that we want to also discuss is focusing on what's in our control as parents, and for our kids, helping them to focus on what's in their control. So when we can do that, it can really help ease anxiety. So I'm going to share another diagram that kind of helps with understanding this. So in this, you can see the outside circle, that blue circle, the bigger one. This is our circle of concern. So it's everything in our life that affects us. And so these are often all the things that are on our mind. But these could be things that are global. They might be things that are federal, so within Canada, within our province, within our city, within our community, within our family, or just internally for us. So this is absolutely everything in our life that affects us. And so often our mind is kind of worrying about all of these things. Within that blue circle, there's a subset that's smaller. And these are the things in our life that affect us and that we can impact but can't control. So maybe they're not within our direct control, but we can impact or influence them. So this is that green circle. And these might be things like, how my boss gives me feedback. If I don't like how they're giving me feedback, I can likely mention it or provide some, explain to them that, it would be helpful for me if you can give it to me in writing, because then I can remember it. I can kind of give them those tips, but I can't control what they ultimately decide to do. So similarly, this might be, the relationship with your kid's teacher. You're not in the classroom with them. You're not sort of holding them like a puppet master and dictating what they do, but you absolutely can advocate for your kid and share what you know works and ask, what information you can provide that would be helpful for them, or what support they would need that would be helpful for them in working with your child. You can absolutely do those things and advocate really effectively. So that's kind of our circle of influence, the things that we might be able to impact or influence, but it's not directly in our control. And then within all of these things, the smallest circle is our circle of control. And these are the things we have complete authority over. They're the things that we decide whether we do or not. These might be things in this current context, like how often we wash our hands, whether we wear a mask all the time when we're outside or only in certain situations. These are the things that are completely in our control. So when we can, ideally, it can be helpful to check in with yourself on, where am I spending most of my time? Am I spending most of my energy on this big blue circle of concern that I actually don't have any influence or control over? And if so, kind of checking that and focusing more on the things that you do have control over and figuring out what you do have control over. So if it's in our control, then we can do those things. If it's something we can influence, we can advocate. And then if it's something we can't, it can be helpful to just remind ourselves of, right, this is one of those things, it's just in the circle of concern, but I actually can't do anything about it. But what I can do, so it might be something like, I can't change what people in Vancouver are doing about COVID-19, and I can stress about it and worry about it because it may impact me. But what I can control is how I take care of myself, and what I can influence is how my family addresses things. So I can talk with my kids and practice hand washing and practice the hygiene that they need and practice physical distancing and support them in that. So those are the things that might be in my control or my influence that might be more effective for me to focus on. For kids, you can kind of simplify this by making a list of what's in your control and what are the things that aren't in your control, and kind of writing a list. And sometimes you can find aspects of the things that are out of our control that are in our control. So if they're worried about, what if I bring COVID-19 home? if that's something they're worried about. It's not something that they can totally control, but the pieces that they can control are what they do about their hand washing, what they do about wearing their mask, and you can kind of support them in really focusing on those things that are within their control. And that can feel really empowering for kids to think about, well, what do I have control over, and what can I do to keep us safe, or what can I do to get to know my teacher this year, even though we don't really, it's kind of hard when they're wearing a mask, right? So you can help them think of things like Amanda was mentioning. So getting a photo of the teacher and asking, so sending a message to them and asking, hey, can we have a photo? And helping kids to think about, what do I have control over? What can I ask for that might help me feel like I've got a bit more power in this situation? So I'm just going to pause and check in with Amanda. Are there any questions from?
Yeah, there's actually a great, again, from a teacher, if I can read it out. And I've been jotting down some of my thoughts because it's a really fair question. This teacher is commenting, for my whole career, I've been able to rely on my ability to read the nonverbal cues of students in my class to know if they might need more support academically or emotionally. Then they're verbalizing, right? Often kids don't put that into words. I've often been able to suggest to families that their kids need extra support or sometimes to be assessed for an LD. I'm remote teaching this year and unsure of how to read my students and how to facilitate them getting the support they need. Any advice? Such a fair question, such a, caring teacher, clearly. I know, I mean, teachers are the experts in education. I know for Torie and myself as well, therapy is learning. And we've had to meet with kids over screens. And I had very similar concerns. So I definitely would say that I'm still learning. I have a few thoughts. But yeah, that's a real challenge and so valid going into the school year.
One thing that I have found, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too, Amanda,
Yeah.
but sometimes just verbalizing that and saying to kids, like, it might be a little harder for me to know how you're feeling about the material because I can't always see you. So I'm going to check in a lot more. And it might be annoying, but I might ask, or if I can't see you, I might ask how you're doing, or just do those check-ins much more frequently. I've heard of some teachers doing, like, having a little check-in card almost, or like a check-in at the beginning of their class where they ask everyone to just like rate how they're doing, or at the end of class, kind of say, having an opportunity to say, send me a message about anything that you didn't make sense, or having those like check-in, check-outs a little more structured than you might normally have because you don't have that sort of informal cues from kids. But it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah. And I was going to say similar things. I think that check-in piece I've absolutely been leaning on, and I can imagine, yeah, for teachers is going to be huge around, I'm noticing it's tough to stay in front of the camera. Is that just because you're moving around, or is it because this isn't really making sense? And just like asking those curious questions in a curious way, not in a shaming way, right? Or like, I'm noticing, that you're looking around the room. Are you just thinking, or is it tough to pay attention right now? Right, and getting a sense for, I think, behaviors that tip us off. Okay, there's something going on. I'm thinking back to that iceberg. There's something going on. It may understandably be more challenging to recognize what that thing might be, but recognizing those clues, yeah. And of course, consulting with parents too.
Yeah, reaching out and asking, what should I be looking for with your kid, or checking in with parents.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that your kid seemed a bit off, but I wasn't sure. Is there anything that's been bugging them? Right, you can kind of reach out
Yeah.
to them in that way.
Yeah. Great question.
Such great questions. Yeah. Um, so I'll keep talking a little bit about some other things to think about with the back to school transition. But again, please keep the questions coming. Um, so yeah, this year might need a lot more practice in getting ready for kids. So things like asking them, helping them develop a workspace if they're doing e-learning, or a calendar for tracking their assignments, helping them set that up and kind of do that ahead of time. As Amanda was talking about, lots of visits to the school can be helpful for some anxious kids. All of those things can be very helpful and kind of help them feel like they have control over some things. Thinking about how they're going to pack their masks and hand sanitizer, or letting them choose which ones, especially if they have a bit more sensitivity to the feel or the smell of hand sanitizer. Having them kind of choose which one feels most comfortable or which they like the best can be a helpful way of getting them a little more comfortable with some of those changes. And certainly reviewing the information that you get from the school in advance with them and going over it, asking them, checking with your kid, do you have any questions about this? What are you most excited about? What do you think with these changes? What might be the hardest for you? And then you can always use that to share with your teacher, because it sounds like, we have all these questions from teachers because they care and they want to do the best for the kids that are in their classes. So definitely, if there are things coming up that your kid is wondering about or worried about, sharing that with the teacher, and brainstorming perhaps what might work best for your kid in terms of getting feedback or support around that. With older kids, you can also ask them what, sort of put them in the driver's seat. So asking them what they think their morning routine will be, and asking them, what might you need from me as support? So do you need a wake-up call? Do you need some help with prepping breakfast? Just checking in with them, but letting them kind of direct a bit. And they have the first say, especially with teens. They need that input and to have some choice in it. And of course, kids right now have lots of questions, and parents too. So one thing that can help is just kind of making a running list of questions and checking off as you get the answers, to be able to see that, okay, not everything is unknown. We do have some answers, even if there's still some uncertainty. And that can help both us as adults and our kids tolerate some of that uncertainty, because we know tolerating some of this not knowing can be really hard and stressful. So having that list and being able to see as it progresses, as you learn more, that can be really reassuring, to know that these will get answered eventually. And obviously you might not have all the answers for your kids' questions, and that's okay. It's absolutely fine to say, I don't know. We can look into this together. Who else could we ask? And kind of do some of that brainstorming with them. And it's totally fine if you don't always have the answer. Because that also kind of models this emotional tolerance of uncertainty, that sometimes we don't have all the answers and we can still kind of move forward with what we know. So yeah, just kind of check in if there are any other questions or things that folks want more information about.
Another teacher did comment that they are having similar concerns, right, with the lack of in-person nonverbal cues as to what's going on. I was thinking, as you were talking there, Torie, that something that could be helpful too is making sure there's multiple channels for that child to express if they need more support or if something's going on, especially right for our kids with LDs. If there's, a private chat to you, if it's, hey, I'm going to stick around for 5 minutes if anyone wants to verbally check in. I know for some, if they can put up that whiteboard on some platforms where they can draw, or I like the idea of, like a check-in in multimodal manner of, how are you doing today? How's your mood today? Something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah. Sometimes even just like a thumbs up or thumbs down. So that one can be public if the whole class is on like a chat or a platform, but something like a thumbs up, thumbs down, how are you doing at the start of class, thumbs up, thumbs down at the end, just to get a sense and kind of flag, maybe I should check in a little more closely with these kids that might be having a harder time. But also definitely having that private channel as well, because not every kid is going to be comfortable giving a thumbs down when other kids are.
Yeah. And I like kind of front loading that, right? Of like, hey, I might ask you to stay for a few minutes after, and that's going to be a regular thing because I want to check in, so that if that moment comes off and that kid seems like they might need some extra support that day, it doesn't strike them as, oh, I'm in trouble or there's something weird, right? Because the teacher's already said, hey, I'm going to check in with people, and that's to be expected. Yeah, for sure.
We are going to share a number of resources. So we'll be putting those up now just so that you can have a chance to look at them and check them out. There are about, I think, 3 that are about the back to school transition and how to support kids around that. There's a great one by Children's Mental Health Ontario. There's a back to school mental health kit that they've put together that's a website online. And there are a couple others that we're going to include. There's a school mental health online website we'll include, and some information from Sunnybrook that's about sort of this transition right now. If you're interested in more information about that, the transition and supporting kids and their mental health in the transition, those are great resources. If you're looking for more information about learning disabilities, we're going to share some of the Integra resources and CDI resources. So the handbook that Amanda was mentioning, as well as we have some resources on our website that we'll put a link to. And we also do have our workshops that we run throughout the school year that you're welcome to sign up for. And we're going to also include the Learning Disabilities Association of Ontario, because they have some fantastic resources. They have a course for educators that's online. They have, I believe, a course for parents as well. So there's lots there. Feel free to check it out depending on where your interests are and what you want to learn more about.
Wonderful. Just got to note that that's up in the comments now. So I hope people, check that out. We also want to encourage you. Hopefully, you found tonight helpful, or maybe got some ideas or some things to reflect on. We really appreciate your thoughts. But follow us on our other social media platforms: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, where we, promote the CEE talks that we've touched on, and, other information sources. And we also have another CDI, Ask CDI night like tonight coming up October 8th. And that's going to be on discussing the intersection of racism and mental health. So very relevant and important topic coming up October 8th.
Yeah, that'll be a great one to tune in for. And we do also, just if you are looking for more of the back to school and sort of COVID specific transition resources, the Child Development website does have a section called Coronavirus that has a number of resources specific to anxiety and supporting kids' mental health during this time. So those resources are great as well. Got lots out there.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just if there are any last questions, we'd love to answer them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll stick around for a couple of minutes. If you have to go, thanks for coming out and spending the evening with us. So we have a question.
Yeah, from a teacher just wondering if these are some resources that would be helpful for parents. Absolutely. Yep. All of the resources that we're sharing can be helpful for both parents and educators. So
great question.
Feel free to share them with others who might find them helpful. Absolutely. Okay. So we'll say good night. Thank you all for joining us. It's been great. We really appreciated the questions and comments as well throughout. And we hope you enjoyed tonight's Ask CDI.
Take care, everyone.